ESPN is exercising their option to lock in the ACC's TV rights through 2036. So Miami, Clemson, Florida State, we're all stuck together. But there are some ways to make extra money.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We made it. I'm Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On this Loaded Friday episode, we'll talk about sleeper players heading into 2025. Who are we not giving enough love to on this Miami Hurricanes football roster? Plus, we'll go over strongest and theoretically weakest units heading into next year. Who needs the most improvement? On all of this conference stuff, this is not a realignment show. This is quite the opposite because I think the ACC is sticking together for a while. Can Miami thrive financially within this conference? And, so with what was reported, and it's going to happen, it was reported last night, Thursday night, which really shouldn't surprise anybody. The ESPN, who, of course, has the ACC's TV rights on very favorable terms. They pay a lot less for the ACC rights than they pay for the SEC's rights. They pay a lot less for the ACC than Fox pays for the Big Ten, and they can lock in those terms for an extra 9 years from 2027 to 2036. Of course, ESPN was going to exercise the option, but, you've had all this over the last year, all this clickbait, some of these like dark web, shadowy YouTube shows that are like, nope, ESPN's going to decline the option and the ACC is going to implode and everybody's going to be free agents and the conference is going to disband. They generated a lot of clicks, some of these folks, for the past year, but it's not happening. ESPN has locked it in, and we have so many angles to get to, and it's why I wanted to bring in very good friend of the show, very good friend of mine. He's a former Sebastian the Ibis. He's also my former colleague at WVUM. Rudy Tomarchio is with us. So, Rudy, let's start the chant. 9 more years. 9 more years at the ACC.
9 more years. I need a drink. I need like an alcoholic beverage next to me. 9 more years. Yeah.
And so, okay, so there are a couple things I mentioned at the top. Even stuck, you could say stuck in the ACC. Listen, there could still be opportunities maybe because the court cases are not over, right? These lawsuits with, Florida State, Clemson, and the ACC, like they're not technically done or settled yet. So maybe there is still a chance the grant of rights gets broken. And, the closer you get to 2036, the cheaper a buyout would be to leave the conference. But I'm assuming we're all stuck together for a while. But one of the interesting things, Rudy, about the ESPN side of it, apparently something that ESPN wants to do for the, final 9 years of the ACC TV deal is make sure that, independent but ACC adjacent Notre Dame plays every single season at least 2 of the 3 top media draws in the ACC, 2 of the 3 Miami, Clemson, and Florida State on a rotating basis, which, yeah, I mean, if you're one of those 3 schools, and of course we cover Miami, to have Notre Dame frequently on the schedule, more TV ratings, theoretically more TV revenue, because Notre Dame's one of the biggest draws in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really smart move because if you look at, Notre Dame had a great year last year, but if you look at what they're able to draw in terms of media rights negotiations on their own, Pete Bavacqua is their athletic director. He's a former president of NBC Sports. So he's negotiated on behalf of Notre Dame with NBC independently. They get like $50 million a year on their own. So they're not hurting for cash by any means. So in this case, when they have a game at home in South Bend, that is NBC. That's airing that game. When you're ESPN and you have the ACC agreement, getting them to play a Miami, a Florida State, well, let's see if Florida State can climb back after the year that they had, and hopefully they could put up some more wins. And then a Clemson too. I mean, you want them to be good. You just don't want them to be 13-0 Florida State. You want that rivalry because college football is good when Miami, Notre Dame, Florida State are all good at the same time. So with those three teams playing those on the road in ESPN territory, it's fantastic for the league because they're going to draw no matter what to see. It's kind of, the ACC is one of their true tests in terms of going sort of in conference, sort of out of conference to play a bigger team that makes themselves look good for the college football playoff committee, for the entire country, for the pollsters to all look at. Because if you look at the ACC, they only have really opening week for, maybe a crossover with an SEC team, and then rivalry weekend at the end of the year where you play another SEC team. So great for ESPN on that side to try to bring that to reality.
Yeah, so that's part of that ESPN does have control over is the scheduling with Notre Dame. There are other things that the ACC is looking to do, basically to keep the Florida States and the Clemsons happy, and they're inching towards maybe a settlement, right? Because we've talked a lot the past 13 months or so about these lawsuits, the court battles between Clemson, FSU, and the ACC. So it seems like they're inching closer towards a settlement. So part of the concessions that the ACC is looking to make that give opportunities for big programs like those in Miami to actually make more money within the current TV deal. One thing is the Success Initiative, which is going to happen, which means the better your seasons are in football and basketball, and boy, our basketball team needs to get better, but the more success you have on the field and on the court, the more money you earn. You can make up to $25 million extra in revenue, which would help you close that gap between, because within the next 2 years, SEC and Big Ten schools are expected to make $30 million more per school than ACC schools. So if you have an opportunity to make 25 more, you can close that gap considerably. Some of those pieces of the Success Initiative include things that Miami did accomplish this past season, like qualifying for a bowl game. That's an easy one. Finishing ranked within the top 25. Miami did that. Advancing through the college football playoff, something Miami didn't do, but Miami would have, if the Success Initiative was already in place, they would have earned extra revenue. And then another part of it, Rudy, this is something that has not been ratified yet, but the ACC is looking to do this really to appease Clemson and Florida State, is that offering extra money and uneven revenue split based on your TV audience and your ratings draw, which obviously Clemson and Florida State usually have better ratings than most of the conference. But I will say Miami last year, Rudy, as we know, Miami had the highest TV ratings in football in the ACC last year. So as long as Miami stays nationally relevant, this can help us out a lot.
Yeah, and that likely is not going to change this year, because now that you don't have Cam Ward anymore, you bring in Carson Beck, which is one of the biggest stories in college football in terms of transferring in, everything around that. Miami trying to retool both offensively and defensively. Looks good from that end. But the thing about both of these is the Success Initiative first that really kind of, ekes at me a little bit, is that's something that the teams can control a little bit. But to be honest with you, the ACC needs to hold up its end of the bargain in terms of the Success Initiative, because they need to increase competition in the conference. If you look at right now, all these metrics that they're assigning to it, top 25 rankings into the year, qualifying for a bowl game, making the college football playoff, all of that is a direct correlation to how good the competition is in conference. And if you look at the way that the ACC is looked at in a national, landscape, the ACC is a joke. We've been talking about it for 21 years now. I want to use like the Titanic meme of it's been 84 years. Yeah, for Miami to win the conference, but it's also been 21 years since this conference has looked like, outside of one team, it's been top heavy as hell. We've been calling it the circle of suck in terms of just how bad everybody cannibalizes each other, because the degree of competition is below par. The officiating is below par. In a year that was, one of the most, the largest amount of parity in college football this year in terms of who was really going to be the top team in college football, you're really looking at a top 8 for the first time in over a decade, where it's been really kind of 2 teams and everybody else. There were still talks going into that final selection show with the college football playoff that maybe only one ACC team gets in. You can't have that reputation. I'm channeling my inner Bruce Warner here and just being truth teller on this one. Welcome back. Full-time, Bruce. Love to have you. I'm just going to channel your energy for a little bit, not in negativity, in just truth-telling, and saying that's on the ACC. They need to make competition better across the conference if some of those metrics are going to work. Now, where the schools have some leverage is on the second half in terms of better ratings numbers. Miami's going to do their part there, helping with Notre Dame. Miami really, if you look at, they released the schedule between Notre Dame and Miami to play for the next 8 years, something like that. The majority of them are in South Bend, so we can't do much about that. But if we keep staying relevant on this side, Miami's a sexy brand. They always make headlines. We always win the offseason, as the haters like to say. So that helps us with the beginning, visibility in terms of what we're going to look like early in the season and getting viewership.
We got a lot more coming up on this episode of Locked On Canes. We got Rudy Tomarchio with us. Can Miami thrive or hopefully continue to thrive in the ACC, or do they need to find somewhere else to go? You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started. Guys, I'm only getting started with Game Time. If you're able to get yourself on a plane and head out to watch Super Bowl 59, that's going to be an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, the connection with other fans is unmatched. Guys, I love going to NFL playoff games. I've covered a Super Bowl, never been to one as a fan, and you can get tickets on the Game Time app. Guys, you can, and I know this sounds like a lot, but starting at $3,500-ish, that's better than a lot of the deals, any of the deals you're going to get out there, and you're going to get it on the Game Time app. I'm also looking at deals in South Florida. Blackhawks at Florida Panthers this Saturday, starting at $27. Celtics at Miami Heat starting at $73. You are getting the best deals and the best features on the Game Time app. And this year, Game Time makes it even easier to create these unforgettable moments with their new feature called Game Time Picks. It filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. Guys, I love how they curate deals to make it easier to find the best prices on great seats. You can get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy right there in the app. On-time ticket delivery, lowest price guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and yeah, we got a deal for you. When you create an account, use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this Friday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On College Football. Spencer McLaughlin does a fantastic job taking you through everything in the college football landscape, including all this NIL, transfer portal, recruiting, previewing next season, available free wherever you get your podcast and available free on YouTube. Got Rudy Tomarchio with us. So, Rudy, Miami is in a unique situation compared to some of the other schools in the ACC, given private institution. There is a lot of money that comes into Miami from donors, and Miami is pretty competitive in NIL. Does Miami need a Power 2 conference less than some of these state schools? Do you think Miami can maybe thrive in an environment? Because we can both agree the ACC is not the best place to be, but can Miami make the most of it?
They can make the most of it, but what they need to do is get a little creative in terms of how they, present their brand out to the country. I mean, something that I talked about over the summer with directly was trying to get a docuseries, and in terms of like having a production crew kind of behind the scenes following the football program, following the athletic department, because we know there's a lot of people that have come out of Miami athletics that not just football, across the entire world, that are compelling figures. That's either in the entertainment industry, guys like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. You've got track and field people like Alicia Newman, who won a bronze medal at the Olympics. You have Jimmy Graham, who's rowing across the Arctic Ocean. Like, you name it, Miami people are doing things everywhere. Why not tell those stories? Well, that's already happening now. The SEC has their own docuseries that's coming out through, I believe it's Netflix, with Box to Box Productions, which is the same company that does Drive to Survive for Formula One. So Miami missed their boat there. They still have an opportunity to do things like that because they are an individual brand that I think is greater than the larger conference of athletics that's out there for some of these other teams. It's just finding the right people that are going to tell those stories and have that influence in terms of pitching that story to production companies. So can they do it? Absolutely. But they have to be more creative, because if you're just going to go by what a network gives you in money, that was so 20 years ago. This is a new environment. You're seeing the players get creative in terms of what they do with NIL deals and how they market their brands. The institution needs to figure out some ways to do that themselves.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And then another thing that I'll throw out there, because I know people just assume, because Rudy, over the last couple of years, there has been a lot of conference realignment, right? With the Big Ten, rating the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and the SEC adding Oklahoma and Texas. There was a lot. It was a busy period for a couple of years of realignment. So it led a lot of people to assume, well, okay, it's going to be a lot more. Like the ACC is going to get rated. But, and this, what I'm about to say, this applies very much to Miami. It applies to Florida State and Clemson, that there's not necessarily an easy soft landing spot out there, because guess what? After the realignment that just happened, all of these schools at the Big Ten and the SEC who are about to get huge cuts of the pie in their new TV deals are not going to be that eager to vote in new members so they can split that revenue and take a smaller piece of the pie. And I think that's something that Florida State and Clemson are starting to realize, and why they may end up settling, right? We're talking about inching towards settlements with the ACC. On the ACC side, I think the ACC doesn't want their grant of rights to be challenged too much, because if it does get broken, that could open the floodgates. That's what they have to lose. But Florida State and Clemson might be realizing, hey, we thought we could just waltz right into the Big Ten or the ACC. Maybe not. So it's another reason, Rudy, why we might be stuck together.
They needed to do that right away, because they had to ride the wave of momentum that they had from being a college football playoff contender, for FSU being, frankly, they were robbed out of being 13-0. Yeah, they didn't have their quarterback, but it doesn't matter. Like your resume over the season, they earned it. Exactly. We talked about this last year on the show. They deserved the right to get annihilated first round of that playoff last year. But anyway, they needed to get out quickly because they needed that stock to be high. Now that you went 2-10 the next year, or Clemson, who snuck their way in, won the ACC and did their job, their brand still doesn't look as good as it did a couple years ago. So in terms of having to be welcomed with open arms somewhere, the time's already passed on that end. And if we want to be sports nerds for a minute, I think what you're going to probably see at some point in time in terms of invitations being extended for schools to join other conferences, there's going to be a buy-in at some point in time. If you look at Formula One, for example, there's a new team that's joining, I believe, in 2026. It's Andretti/Cadillac. It's really Cadillac and GM. The Andretti name is kind of like non grata for what they're doing. They got to pay $200 million to get into Formula One, because that's going to make up for the revenue lost by the additional team split. There's 10 teams. They split all of the revenue evenly. They had to put up $200 million, so that way everybody gets still an even distribution of revenue. You're probably going to see something similar to that in college football moving forward. If you're tied up in lawsuits, if you're not spending the money on the field because you're not making the money back in terms of success, your stadium is under construction right now, so you don't even have the attendance numbers that you're looking to do. You can't find sponsors because you're tied with the same company that Miami uses, who can't find good corporate sponsors either. Looking at you, legends. Sorry, we're going to fire some shots out here today.
Yeah, you really are. This is like an extra Truth Teller Tuesday today.
Hey, I gotta shout out my boy Bruce. So we're bringing it because of this mishmash of things that's happening. That's what you're looking at in terms of a landscape. So all you could do is control what you have in front of you, which is try to put out the best product on the field that you can, try to attract some sponsors by doing that consistently over the years, and get creative with what you're doing outside of it. Other than that, that's all you have, because the sports world's getting more expensive. And something else we've talked about over the course of this conference realignment is how many of those schools that have moved in have buyer's remorse now? Schools like USC and UCLA, where they thought maybe they'll be a competitor, at least be in the top, upper echelon of the Big Ten. They went 500. It's exactly what we were saying in terms of it only benefits the top 5 teams, or top 4 teams in this case with the Big Ten, because they all got playoff bids. Somebody has to go 500. Somebody has to have a losing record every year. That's the majority of your conference. So unless you're ready to play, unless you figure out your travel and get some of these logistics figured out, you're going to end up on the bottom half of that. So your brand diminishes by being part of this larger diluted league that's coming through. And I think the last point on that one, Alex, too, was outside of just the logistics of having to travel across the country in all these sports, we learned through the Xavier Lucas deal with Darren Heitner, they're trying to lock in athletes to 2-year deals and own their NIL. That's very not shady. A college football, wide provision. That's, so far we know, a Big Ten piece. And I wouldn't be surprised if the SEC had something similar, since the Big Ten and the SEC do all these things kind of in lockstep. They have that partnership that they, they're, what do they call it? A cooperation, where they talk to each other about things and leave everybody else off the table. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's going to happen too. That's not something that's attractive for a USC, a UCLA, a Washington, and Oregon. I mean, Oregon might be able to do it with Phil Knight money, but these are all things that I think raise some question marks for the future of how things are going.
Let's talk some football. Sleepers heading into the 2025 season. Who on this Miami Hurricanes football roster are we not talking about enough? Rudy, heading into this 2025 campaign, every now and then when I go through the roster and I talk about, certain players I expect to compete for starting jobs and stuff, oftentimes some of these are fair. I get angry comments from listeners like, "Hey, how come you're not talking about this guy?" I even had a comment the other day like, this player, someone said, I'll tell you the name that they told me, this player is going to transfer and it's going to be your fault, Donno, because you're not hyping him up enough. I'm like, oh my God, am I really going to destroy Miami's roster? So I'd love to know from you, Rudy, sleeper players, if you got one, offense or defense or both, who, you think we're not giving enough attention to heading into next year.
Look, if you have that kind of clout and that kind of pull where you got to hype up players to keep them around at Miami, they need to up your pay, my friend. But in terms of sleepers, I'll go with one that I think is kind of an obvious one. You even profiled this player earlier this week, but Armando Blount, because he had all of this hype coming out of high school. We know he's been working behind the scenes, same, program as Ruben Bain, expecting big things. So I'm going to go with Armando Blount.
And by the way, that was the guy that the commenter said. He said Armando Blount is going to transfer because you don't give him enough respect, Donno. And it's like, did they not see? And to be fair, it was Gio Milian who brought him up, but I posted out the clip on social with Gio talking about Armando doing really well. And I love Armando Blount. Like, I really do. And I think now he's getting to be even more physically mature, because remember, he came into college a year early. And yeah, I think Armando Blount could end up being a force to be reckoned with as soon as this year on that defensive line. So I hope, first of all, I don't think he's going to transfer, and I certainly hope he doesn't because of me. So
I think you need to ride with this. I think you need to ride with it, though. Like, I think you need to make like a big prop, like Donno plug, and just like bring it out every time and be like, this is the boost. Because of me, you're going to get more playing time. You're going to get more NIL deals. You're going to do all these things because I'm using my platform to hype you up. I might as well just get the air horn out and be like, you're the new DJ Khaled for like everybody that's coming through. So Armando Blount, congratulations, you're going off this year because you got the Donno plug.
Another one, I'll give you one on offense, and I'm not just saying this because I'm trying to keep this player happy. Again, I don't think I have that much power, but I realize I don't talk about this wide receiver as much as I talk about some of the other young ones, and that's Chance Robinson. Chance, didn't play much last year, but a lot of the young receivers didn't play much last year because Miami had such an established rotation. Heading into his now second season at Miami, and Chance has that size that a lot of us really want to see more, at these outside receiver positions. He's 6'2", about 200 pounds, was excellent at St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, his final 2 seasons of high school had over 500 receiving yards in each of them, double-digit touchdown receptions in each of those final 2 seasons. And as we've seen, a lot of St. Thomas Aquinas players the last couple of years have shown that they're ready to make impacts at young ages. I mean, we had Jordan Lyle and OJ Frederic as true freshmen, both get a lot of burn last year. So, yeah, I mean, I think with the turnover with Miami's receiver core, while I think JoJo Trader is probably going to be the guy whose stock is going to rise the highest, Chance, I think could be right up there as well. Chance and Nikar. So I realize, Rudy, I don't talk about Chance Robinson enough. I think he could blow up this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to say that anybody on the offensive side of the ball is, not being talked about enough, because I think that's kind of the reputation that Miami's had over this past year is they got studs. They got studs first team. They got studs on the bench. They got studs on the scout team. Like, Miami's loaded offensively at every single position. You want to throw out guys like you were mentioning, JoJo Trader, who's obviously out there. Malachi Toney is coming in, who they expect big things from too. Like, there's so many players to talk about. That's why I'm kind of sticking with defense, because the year that they had, you got to hope that someone's being slept on, that someone who didn't have enough playing time, either from seniority or whatever, they just didn't think they were ready, that they're ready to make an impact this year. Hey, let's even say maybe a guy like Marquise Lightfoot, after what they were doing at the Pop-Tarts Bowl, get a great NIL opportunity for him with Modelo, mark up a fighter, take some of that energy, put it into the offseason and come out. Because what were those stories of guys like, I'm trying to remember if it was, those stories when like the team that loses, there's like always a kid that's like watching the trophy presentation and like the confetti fall. And like, I just need to soak this in. This is my origin story for being the villain next year. I'd
Yeah.
love a couple of those guys on the defensive side of the ball to be like, we didn't have a good year. I want to change this.
I mean, they all had to watch Rocco Becht, who got to select which human Pop-Tart was put through the toaster. I mean, we wanted that for ourselves. All the Miami players wanted that, right? I think that's a good one with Marquise Lightfoot, and and I think it would be a great story for him because he possesses all the tools, I should say. He's so gifted, Marquise Lightfoot, and I think for him it's just been more about putting on the weight and the consistent strength. And then another one who, plays a similar position that I think could end up really hitting big this year, Rudy, is Booker Pickett Jr. We saw some signs from him in limited playing time. And I remember a year ago at this time, kind of the way we just watched Hayden Lowe, dominate in postseason high school all-star games. Booker Pickett was doing that last year, absolutely dominating the postseason high school games. So I could see Booker Pickett Jr. being another one who really hits big this year.
Yeah, I mean, hey, speaking of all-star games, look at what the guys leaving Miami have been doing in the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl between Elijah Arroyo, Sam Brown. Where was that this year? He had some great plays for Miami this year offensively, but there were some things I saw in that Senior Bowl, the practices, like where was that?
To me, and I said this in the Locked On Canes Insiders chat yesterday. And by the way, if you guys want to try it free for 14 days, click the link in the show description below. Become a Locked On Canes Insider. I don't think anybody has, and I mean everybody who's involved in the Senior Bowl, not just Miami players. I don't think anybody's raised their stock more than Elijah Arroyo. I mean, I see a lot of folks saying, a lot of the NFL scout type of people like, hey, I had him like around my top 50, but now he's looking like a first round draft pick. I mean, Arroyo has been completely unguardable and dominant in one-on-one reps. We'll see how he performs like in the actual Senior Bowl, but Arroyo is turning a ton of heads in the Senior Bowl. And, even East-West Shrine, it was nice to see Kiko get a fumble recovery in the game the other day. And I know Andy Borregales, obviously it's always tough for kickers to break in because there's only 32 spots available, and kickers tend to age pretty gracefully in the NFL, so it's hard to get in. We've seen with Jose Borregales how hard it is to get in and stick with that fraternity, but some folks are talking about Andy Borregales maybe being a late round draft pick and actually getting an opportunity to kick somewhere. So we're seeing Miami players raising their stocks left and right. And Damian Martinez, I saw something cool on him. He's going to play in the Senior Bowl, but he was, the last guy to leave the field the other day in practices because he stayed to sign every autograph. Like he's this. And it's another thing. I wish, Rudy, like you said, I wish we could get a docuseries to tell some of these stories because, a lot of people don't really know, who Damian Martinez is as a person. But this guy's a tremendous human being, and in addition to being a good football player.
Let's sing Miami's praises for a little bit here in terms of this, because you have all these on the field personalities like Cam Ward and Damian Martinez and, guys in the league like Michael Jackson, who's still doing his thing. And with the Buffalo Bills, who just had the offseason, Greg Rousseau, there's guys out there. But then you also have people like, Christine Williamson, Beanie from the volleyball team, is on Sports Center. How it doesn't get much bigger than that. You have some of the biggest influencers in different industries. There's guys like Peter Miller and the Gale Force twins, who are the biggest fishing influencers around in South Florida, who, fish with professional athletes and go with Gordon Ramsay. Like, you pick an industry and there's somebody from Miami that's at the top of it. The CEO of Bose is a Miami cheerleading alum. Why? Because she started there as an intern. She developed a couple things technology-wise. And you're really smart. We should have you run the company. And there she is doing it. Why is she smart? She went to Miami, obviously.
Of course. Yeah. Well, listen, tremendous. I know we had talked about maybe going through strongest and weakest units. We'll pick that up on another episode. I really appreciate Rudy Tomarchio taking the time. And folks, 9 more years of the ACC. We're all locked in until 2036. Make sure you guys follow Rudy on X at Rudy Tomarchio. Check him out. Follow us at Locked On Canes. Rudy, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me on. We made it on Friday. Yes.
I'm about to watch the new episode of Severance on Apple TV. I'd say one of the best shows out there, man. And it comes out every Friday. News episode of Severance drops. That's my appointment right there. So I'm going to go check that out. And they don't sponsor me. They should, because I'm a huge fan of the show.
They'll be watching the show. Have your people talk to their people, make it happen.
Yeah. We'll make that happen. We'll talk to everyone next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.